Today I bought no less than 100 books at a local thrift store. We have this nearby outlet Goodwill, which, though owned by the Goodwill Company, is not like normal Goodwills. If you've never been to one before, essentially what they do is they take all the items that they want to sell and they throw them into huge bins, and you rifle through them and try to find treasures hidden here or there. They recently reorganized ours to have book bins. These book bins, about 8 or so of them were out today. They're huge and just totally filled with books. They call them book salvage boxes. You honestly can't even get to the bottom of them. Today, I probably fully investigated 4 of them and left the other 4 only kind of skimmed on the surface. But anyways, I walked away with 100 books, 50 cents a piece. So yeah, $50 in books, not too bad. Let's go ahead and dive into each one of them. What better place to start than with the kids' books? So, this is The Phantom Toll Booth. I have never read this book. My wife and kids have never read this book. I was recently watching a bookshelf review by a YouTuber I follow, and he recommended this book, so it was kind of a fun coincidence to stumble upon it. It sounds like a nice book. It sounds fun. It'll be enjoyable. Maybe a good read-aloud book at some point. Next we have The Wolves of Willoughby Chase. I know almost nothing about this book, if I'm being entirely honest. I've seen it before, and I love the art on it, but that's actually all I know about it. I don't think I've read this. I think it was at my house when I was a kid, but I know nothing about it. Should be fun. I got another copy of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. These are classics. My wife and I enjoy them very much growing up. We already have many copies of this book, but this one in particular felt kind of sturdy, a little bit sturdier than normal, a little denser than normal, nicer paper than normal, and it also has some kind of pretty, colorful illustrations in it. My son absolutely loves Frog and Toad, so I got Frog and Toad Together, which is one we didn't have. We all really like A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, so I found this child's adaptation called Scrooge. It looks fun. I'm sure the kids will love it. I got an old, nice copy of the Bobbsey Twins. My wife apparently read these as a kid and very much loved them. I've got Little Bear's Friend, which is another book that my son really loves. He loves the Little Bear collections. This was a nice older hardback, so I decided to pick it up. I've got Mouse Tales, which is another kids' reader hardback. I've never read these, but it looked fun, so I picked it up. It looked kind of along the lines of Little Bear or A Frog and Toad, and it turns out it's written by Arnold Lobel, who's the author of Frog and Toad. Classic Little Bear book. Frog and Toad are friends. We've got Days with Frog and Toad. My kids like the Berenstain Bears a lot, so I got The Spooky Old Tree, a nice older copy of it. Another Little Bear, Little Bear's Visit. This is the one where he visits his grandparents. It's a very sweet story. I know he's out of style right now, but it's a classic, 10 Apples Up on Top. My son loves this book. It's a great counting book, fun little story. We've got Danny the Dinosaur, which I remember when I was a kid was a great book. This was kind of an impulse buy. I have no idea what it is. It's called Yaya by Anna Dorr. I liked it because the art was just kind of interesting. It's got kind of this impish quality to it. I'm not sure if you can see that. It's all kind of pen art, and the only color in the book is red, aside from the black, it appears. So I just thought that this was kind of interesting. Maybe something my kids would like, maybe something that would scare them, which it's fun to be a little scared sometimes. I got a paperback copy of Where the Wild Things Are. We have a hardback copy of this already, but this book is generally loved and also kind of valuable, I think, even as a paperback copy used. We got Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the book. My son really, really loved the cartoon. He really loves the cartoon of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, but we've been cutting back on TV time, so I figured this would be a good book for him to read. I know nothing about this book. It's called Could Be Worse. It just kind of looked like a fun art style, but I guess it's about this granddad who goes through all these kind of unfortunate events, and they kind of get worse and worse, and he keeps just saying it could be worse. So that seemed like a lot of fun. And then we've got The Hat by Jan Brett. My kids really love The Mitten by Jan Brett, which is a Ukrainian folktale. The art is just kind of wonderful, kind of nice. The stories are usually pretty interesting, and they kind of have these weird little panels on the side where they show you what other characters are doing as the story's going on. So here's an example of one of those. It should be a good book. Never read this one before, though. All right, next up we have Are You My Mother? A board book. We have the longer, unabridged version of this book as a paperback, and the kids love it. We love it too. It's a sweet book. This was a bit of an impulse buy. It's called While You Were Sleeping. I thought my daughter might like it because of all the cute animals in it. It's basically about all the things that go on in the wild while you were sleeping. Here's a tiger. Here's some sweet little mice or hamsters. Some little bears. Looks nice. I got I Love You Spot, which is the classic Spot book. We have a few of these. We do not have this one. I got Eric Carle from Head to Toe. This book looks like a lot of fun. It's all about animal motions and animal gestures and making movements like animals, which I figured my kids would love because they have this other book which does a donkey kick, and they love doing a donkey kick. So I figured they'd enjoy this book. And we like Eric Carle. We like Brown Bear, for example. Speaking of Brown Bear, here's another complement book to Brown Bear. This is Polar Bear, What Do You Hear? It's the same format as Brown Bear, but different animals and about hearing. That should be fun. And next we're into the more educational books for kids. So I got a couple poetry books. This is an Edgar Allan Poe poetry for kids. Not sure if any of my kids will like poetry, so maybe a gamble, but you know, just in case, it's 50 cents. Here we have Walt Whitman for kids. Not even sure if that's a good thing for kids to be reading. I have no idea, honestly, but it's there anyways. I got The Joy of Signing, which is a large book, mostly illustrations about sign language and about how to make signs, how to do the alphabet, what have you. Both my wife and I growing up had siblings who were really interested in sign language, so this is maybe not a risk per se, but it's something that I suspect some kid we know at some point will be interested in, so saving that for the future. Next we have Medieval Weapons and Warfare, which this just looks like an interesting book. I love especially the old kind of medieval art style that it's got going. Little archers and little castles and whatnot. Looks pretty good. This is a particularly neat book. It's a crocodile book. It's all about the crocodile's organs and bones and anatomy, essentially. So as you flip each page, you're going to see different parts of the crocodile's internals unfold. So first you've got the skeletal system, then you've got the cardiopulmonary system, then you've got the digestive system, then you've got the reproductive system and the nervous system, and then the muscle system and the skin in the end. So this just seemed really cool. I think my son will absolutely love this. All right, now let's go into the non-kids books. So this first stack that I've got is books that I couldn't otherwise categorize very well. These are sort of how-to books, topical books, bird spotting books, etc. So in the how-to category, first we've got the mixing guide, which my wife and I have a couple of things like this already, but essentially it's just a small recipe book for cocktails. We don't drink very many cocktails these days, but maybe in the future might be a nice thing. This was probably the one that I bought that maybe wasn't worth the 50 cents, but still. The next thing, and I've been looking for things like this for quite a while, is Reptiles and Amphibians of North America, or I guess American species, but probably means North America, I'd imagine. It's just a nice little guide to the different kinds of snakes, turtles, frogs, what have you, you might spot. I like books like this a lot. My kids really like nature. I really like nature. So it's nice to have books like this as quick reference to find what you're looking at and figure out what it actually is. So pretty excited about that as a find. Next up is Play According to Hoyle. So basically this is a book of games, a book of card games. And yeah, that's really not much more to say. I generally don't like books like this, but I've kind of been getting more into them lately because, I don't know, they're good resources. They're interesting. If you're kind of bored someday and you want to play cards, you know, you could look into this and find a new game that you've never heard of before, never played before, or never really knew the rules to. So it's kind of fun. This was an absolute score, in my opinion. This is one of the best finds of the day. We have Hootenanny Tonight. It is a collection of hootenanny music, bluegrass, ballads, and blues. I love bluegrass music, so I figured this would be kind of a fun one. It's got basically a bunch of stuff about how you might arrange it. It's got some phrasing about how you might arrange it, and it's got actual pieces in it. So it's got sheet music for pieces, so maybe I'll take this over to the mandolin at some point. I think that would be a really good one. Next is How to Be a Winner at Chess. I know chess book readers are very opinionated, and there are probably books you should read and should not read. I have no idea where this falls. I do not actually like playing chess, but a lot of people in my family really like playing chess. So I figured I would get this book and, maybe read it at some point. I like reading books about games, so I could kind of, grandfathered into using that logic. Maybe actually show some of my family some tricks they haven't seen yet. This book is a very random impulse buy. I don't know that I'll read it, but it's kind of interesting. This is Experiments in Seeing. I'll just read what the subtitle is because I don't know much more about it than that, but it says a lively original account of what is known about the eye, its relation to the brain, and to the act of seeing. Highly recommended. So yeah, it's interesting. It's got these various little illustrations which are kind of cool, and it kind of has experiments that seem to be kind of like the slit experiment or the two slit experiment. I forget exactly what it's called, but if you don't know what I'm talking about, Google it. It's kind of an interesting thing about sight and perception. I have The Beginner Investor. This is another one of those things like chess books where you probably should read specific ones and avoid a whole class of other ones. This is probably in the avoid list, but I figured it might be good to kind of just get some kind of an idea what's going on with this whole stock market thing. So I got this. I probably will read through it unless someone gives me a better suggestion before I dive in. Next we've got Webster's Grammar Handbook, nice hard copy cover. These are dime a dozen at thrift stores. You find these everywhere. All the rules are available online, but lately I've been getting more into reading and writing, so I figured it would be useful to at least have a copy of this to maybe skim through, maybe use as reference. Next is Why Architecture Matters. I'm not actually super interested in architecture, but I have been in the past, so I figured if I go through one of those phases again, it might be nice to have something to be able to pick up and read. Looks like it's got some nice pictures in it. This one is really wild. I don't even know how to categorize this one, but it's Charles Aubert, The Art of Pantomime. So it is literally a book about how you can do pantomiming things, kind of different gestures you can make, different body postures you can assume to do entertaining things, essentially. Here's like the classic, like pushing against a wall that doesn't exist kind of thing. Here's like some lip movements. This is a really random one. I don't really know what to say about this other than it just seems like a lot of fun. I feel like I'd enjoy it. And we can all use more gesticulation in our speech, especially nowadays in this internet age where we're kind of, talking into a screen like this on repeat all day long. So that'll be nice. This is a very interesting book. It's How to Read a Book. It's a book about how to read a book. Seems like a waste of time, right? Not from what I understand. From what I understand of this book, this is very valuable. This is the kind of book that you read to get more out of other reading. This should help you more quickly read books, better read books, be able to synthesize books better, and be able to take key points out of books better. That's kind of what I understand of this book. It's a classic, so I'm really actually pretty excited to read this. I feel like it's one of those books you want to read sooner rather than later if you're getting into reading, because, well, it's going to help you through the whole process. It's going to be like a jump start for some skills. Next, we have a bird feeder guide. I don't really know what that means exactly, what differentiates a bird feeder guide from just a bird guide, but essentially what we've got is a book full of birds, where they live, what they eat, where they hang out, and other information about birds. We love books like this. Again, I mentioned this with the reptiles and amphibians book, but we like spotting nature, and this should hopefully help in that process. Next, we have a complete book of pool. I really enjoy playing pool, and I figured this could be useful both from a what are the actual rules of pool perspective, and also from a getting kind of some unique takes on the game, some of the history of the game, figuring out some tricks. This should be an interesting one. This next one is a little bit random. It's not really for me. I'm probably going to give it to a family member or a friend, but I have this illustrated book of guns, which has over 1,000, and I can barely lift it, it's so big, illustrated guns, rifles, pistols, what have you. I have a lot of friends, family who are really, really into guns, collecting, looking at them, thinking about them, what have you. So I figured this book would make one of their days. Not sure who I'm giving it to yet, but yeah, it seems like an interesting book. So this is the start of another thread of books you're probably going to see throughout this whole video. Piloting seamanship and small boat handling. This year I've been reading a couple books about seafaring, mainly either fiction or historical. I read Red Seas Over Red Skies. I read Endurance, which is Shackleton's journey. And I read, there's one other one, I forget what it was. But anyways, I've kind of had a new interest in anything sea related. So this seems like a good book to learn about these things, learning different terminologies of ships, how to actually maneuver ships, what the different parts of a ship are. I'm sure it's got some rope work in it, which is cool, navigation, which is cool. But yeah, this seemed like a good kind of getting started book. I don't intend to buy a ship anytime soon, or even honestly probably sail anytime soon, but this felt like it was too hard to pass up given that recent seafaring interest I've kind of started to develop. All right, next up is fiction. The first book we've got is Dean Koontz' Life Expectancy. This is a book I've read a couple times. It's kind of a beat up copy, but it's a book I really enjoyed. So for 50 cents paperback, hard to pass it up. It might be a loaner, give to people when they want to borrow it from you, if they want to borrow it from you. Next is The Best Christmas Pageant Ever. Never read this book, but it might be a fun one to read around Christmas time. My wife and I were both in the play in high school era, so this should be an interesting one. It should be fun. Bring back some memories, maybe. Next, we've got James Herriot, All Things Bright and Beautiful, which is another book by the author of All Creatures Great and Small. So yeah, this seems like it would be fun. It seems like it would be heartwarming reading. Maybe a good book for me to read aloud to my family, to the kids, maybe when they're a little bit older. Next is a book that I picked out for my wife, although I'm probably going to be reading it myself at some point, I imagine, because the movie is so good. We have The Princess Bride. Yeah, not much else to say about it. If you haven't seen the movie, go watch it. It's a fun movie. Speaking of movie books, or books that inspired movie, or books that are written after a movie, I don't know which way the direction goes for all of these. We've got Ken Kesey, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Another great movie. I've wanted to read this book for quite a while. It was kind of a score to find it today. Continuing in the maritime theme and the seafaring theme, we've got Blackbeard the Pirate. Seems like a fun book. I don't really know much more about this. This may not actually be fiction, I guess. I don't know. I really don't know. It's supposedly written by Robert E. Lee. I don't know if that's General Robert E. Lee or someone else by the same name, but anyways, that should be interesting. So next in the fiction category, we've got a couple sci-fis, both by the same author. We've got Frank Herbert, Man of Two Worlds, which is not in the Dune series, I believe, but I'm pretty excited to maybe read this someday. I really enjoyed Dune, the first book in the series. I haven't read anything else by him. I'm looking for Dune Messiah at thrift stores. But yeah, that should be good. And speaking of Dune, the last book in the fiction section that I got was Chapter House Dune, which is the final Dune book in the series. So this may be a little bit of a risk. This may be never read. I've heard these books kind of go a little bit off the rails, but my thought is if I read the second one, I might get hooked and not be able to stop and then want this at some point. So for 50 cents, it seemed like a risk I was willing to take. All right, next up is classics and philosophy. I've been buying a lot of classics lately because, let's face it, they're really enjoyable books most of the time, and they make for good audiobooks. So first up, we've got The Epic of Gilgamesh. I've never read this book. I remember really enjoying the story. I've heard it read before, so it should be an interesting book to read myself, and the experience of having it read is very nice, so I'd recommend that if you have an opportunity. Next we've got Plato the Symposium. I actually already have a copy of this one, but I like older copies. This is a slightly older Penguin copy. Next we have Plato's The Republic and Other Works. I really, really want to read The Republic. It's been on my list for quite a while to read. This is probably the third copy I have of it. What happened with this book was I started reading a more modern translation at some point, and about halfway through it I kind of just got disgusted with the translation and was starting to sort of doubt if it was true to the original. This should be good. This looks like an older copy, an older translation. Maybe this will be the one that I actually get through. Next up, another seafaring book, Moby Dick by Herman Melville. This is a great book. I read this year, a couple months ago. This was not my best book of the year, but it was pretty darn close. It was an excellent, excellent read. Very, very poetical, very enjoyable and gripping. I read it in about 20 days or so, and I was reading other books at the same time, so that maybe shows you some, even, it's a pretty long book, so that maybe shows you some of the kind of gripping nature of this book. I would highly recommend reading it. There's a lot of whale facts mixed into it. You may not like that, but I found that it kind of made the plot a little more complete and well-rounded and gave a little more substance to the actual narrative in the book. All right, next we have Aristotle on Man in the Universe. So, of course, Aristotle doesn't actually have a book titled that or a work titled that. This is a collection of works. Politics, Nicomachean Ethics, Parts of Animals, Metaphysics. Nice little Aristotle collection hardback. This book I know nothing about, but it is a classic. It was translated from some other language. We've got The Song of Roland. Even though I know nothing about it, I am very interested to read it. This is probably going to be a higher priority to read. And as I mentioned, it kind of fits in that art style that I was talking about liking earlier for that medieval weapons book. We've got Eucyclesis I, Aresteria. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Translated by Richard Lattimore. I've got an Iliad by Lattimore. It's virtually unreadable, if I'm being entirely honest. This seems a little more digestible and smaller. So it's got Agamemnon, the libation bearers, and the Emunides. Yeah, so this might be read, it might not. More fodder for my Greek classics section. This book was a nice find, I'd say. It's a Jack London stories book. So Jack London is famous for Call of the Wild, White Fang. This has got those. Well, actually, this might not have White Fang, I think. I was looking through it, I didn't see it. Yeah, I don't think this has it. It's got a bunch of short stories and Call of the Wild. But still, it's got this kind of nifty dust cover art, which is kind of pretty in its own right. This will be a good read-aloud book for the kids when they're a little older, I'm sure. Speaking of nice dust covers, we've got the complete short stories of Mark Twain. It's funny, my wife actually just bought this exact book for me from, I believe, this exact same thrift store a day or two ago. The reason I rebought it is because this dust jacket is very, very nice. The copy she got me does not have this wonderful little dust jacket. So I rebought it basically just for the dust jacket. But yeah, this is nice. I've never actually read Mark Twain, so I'm not sure where I want to start. But again, more classics. This might potentially make good audiobook fodder. This was another risky book to buy. I don't know anything about the author. I don't read economical books. I don't read economics books. We've got Irving Fisher, The Debt Deflation Theory of Great Depressions. It seemed like maybe an interesting book given the times we live in, given history. It seems to contain some good stuff, not really sure. All right, next we've got The Complete Works of Shakespeare with a beautiful little gold embezzled cover art. So yeah, Shakespeare, I mean, what needs to be said? This is just a nice collection, hardback. The binding is in pretty good condition, maybe a little loose, but you know, a loved book is a loved book, so that's nice. I intend to read some Shakespeare soon. I think I've read one of his plays in the past, but I would like to read a little bit more. They also make a good kids book if Kids are into that kind of stuff later. I know nothing about Irving, but I got an Irving collection. It was in this nice hardback with a bookmark and kind of fancy. Again, maybe more potential audiobook fodder just to try it out. It's hard for me to pass up a classic collection when it's 50 cents in hardback. Next we've got Hawthorne, which is a little bit more of the same. Of course, Hawthorne is the author of The Scarlet Letter. I don't know, I wouldn't normally buy a Hawthorne, but again, 50 cents for a hardback, nice collection. I'll give it a try. I mean, of course, if you look up here, it was originally free. So that's a little interesting. That's always something you experience at thrift stores. No matter how cheap they mark stuff, unless it's free, you will probably see books that you want to buy that are priced lower than the price you're going to pay at the thrift store, which is kind of an interesting little thing to notice. So next we've got a 3-part Harvard Classics. I love these Harvard Classics collections. I have Crime and Punishment and a couple other books in a set like this. They're very nice, very durable. Some of them are very old, which I love buying old books. This is a Homer collection, which I think is actually just the Odyssey. This is a Plutarch collection, which has Caesar in it, so that's going to be an interesting read. Then we've got Marlowe, Shakespeare. So yeah, I bought some Shakespeare today. All right, next we've got the quote controversial pile. These are the books that I didn't really know how to categorize as well. It's more saying just they were kind of in those broad categories of things that are special interest, like political or theological or, I don't know, self-improvement, those kind of other books. I don't really know how to categorize them other than that. So we've got, starting out, More Misinformation, a new collection of fables, fallacies, and fictions from master debunker Tom Burnham. I don't know if this is any good. I was just thinking the other day, though, that it's really interesting whenever you learn something you thought was always true or you always thought was true was actually not true. So this book's kind of in line with that. Not sure if I'll read it anytime soon, but it could be a fun read. Next we've got Unwritten Laws. So I absolutely love eponymous laws. When I saw this, I didn't actually know that's exactly what it was. But that's what it is. It's just a collection of things like Murphy's Law, essentially. So looking at the back, we've got some examples. We've got like Capone's Law. Oh, I should say eponymous laws are laws that are named after their author, if you don't know. Capone's Law. You can get a lot more done with a kind word and a gun than with a kind word alone. It's solid. Lance's Law. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah, like you've heard all of these before. Walpole's Law. Every man has his price. Good stuff. I love these. I'm definitely going to read this. That'll be a fun one. I don't know much about this book in actuality. It's Alan Bloom, The Closing of the American Mind. Sounded like an interesting topic, sounded a little bit controversial. Might be an interesting read. Very curious to maybe dig into it. We'll see where it goes. So this book might be a little more controversial too. This is Scott Adams' Win Bigly. I kind of wanted this book when it came out. I'm not exactly sure what it's about, but I love Scott Adams. I love Dilbert. I loved the Dilbert Principle. But when it came out, it was maybe like $15 or something like that, which was probably $8 more than I would have spent on it at the time. But finding a brand new, untouched hard copy for 50 cents was good enough for me. May never read it, but maybe I will. Again, I like these comic strips, so we'll see. Next, we have a book on existentialism. I don't own any Nietzsche or Kierkegaard, so this had them in it, and I thought it would be interesting. It's called Reality, Man, and Existence, Essential Works of Existentialism. So it's got Kierkegaard, it's got Nietzsche, it's also got Sartre, Jaspers, Buber, and Merleau-Ponty. Probably mispronouncing one or two of the names in there. You can probably figure out which ones. So another book which was kind of a risk potentially, but seemed pretty relevant to the day and age we live in and kind of what's going on in the world, was The Triumph of Narrative, Storytelling in the Age of Mass Culture. Again, this is one of those books I have absolutely no idea what I bought. It could be complete and utter garbage. It could be really good. Wow, that's cool. In the camera, it's showing really clearly a woman's face, but if you actually zoom into it, I can't actually replicate it on the camera. It always shows pretty clearly as a woman's face, but if you look at it without the camera, it's actually really hard to see. So that's kind of a cool trick, unless you pull it away. I didn't notice that until I was looking at it. I don't actually like Chomsky. I've never read any Chomsky. But again, another book that seemed maybe kind of interesting in the current climate we live in is Noam Chomsky's Pirates and Emperors Old and New. International Terrorism in the Real World. Sounded kind of interesting. We'll see what it's about. I have no idea. It could be utter garbage. It could be excellent. It's funny, a family member and I were just talking about this book and I spotted it for 50 cents, so I had to pick it up. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I do sometimes indulge on kind of the self-help book. This is a classic self-help book. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a good self-help book. Doesn't necessarily mean there are good self-help books. I'm sure there are. I just haven't found them yet. But yeah, gonna read this. Next we've got I shouldn't say one of my favorite authors because I've only actually read one thing by this author, but I absolutely loved what I read by this author. The author is G.K. Chesterton. We've got The Everlasting Man. This is going to be a good read. I know. This is one of the first books I spotted when I first started looking in those salvage bins. So, yeah, I was really excited to see this, and it probably spurred my 2 hours of searching through bins from then on. This book is another book that's probably not for me. This doesn't really interest me, but I have friends and family members who are interested in this. This is The Tower of Babel, The Evidence Against the New Creationism. So it's one of those old Earth, young Earth books. Again, not really my cup of tea, but I bought it in case someone I knew would be interested in it. All right, next we've got biographies. So we've got Gotti, the biography of John Gotti, the mobster. This should be really interesting. I've been meaning to kind of increase my biography, both library and reading. I don't know necessarily this one will be top of the list for reading, but maybe someday I'll get kind of a craze for mobster bios and dive into it. So, but I mean, John Gotti, right? Interesting. This was my number one find from the day. If you know me, you know I absolutely love Russian literature from the past. I love Russian history. This is Nicholas and Alexandra by Robert Massey. So this is a story of them. I'm sure it's a bio piece. Got some really cool old pictures in it. Very, very old book. I read a book last year, The Last Tsar, which was about them. Excellent story. Very interesting story. Very sad story. This is going to be a number one pick for the haul. All right, you may have thought that was a little controversial, so you're really going to love what's next. We got Richard Nixon in the Arena. Richard Nixon is super controversial, of course. So, of course, I figured it'd be interesting to hear what he has to say. Sometimes it's worthwhile when someone's really controversial to hear what they have to say. You don't necessarily have to agree with them. You don't necessarily have to support them. But yeah, I'm curious to hear what that's all about. Another good bio piece for the collection. All right, next we have historical books. This is The Journals of Lewis and Clark. So that's kind of interesting. That should be good. I'm not sure how much it'll be seafaring, but it might fall in line with that. But it falls in line with a good old history book. Next, and I don't know much about this one, but I assume it's actually history and not fiction, we have Richard Hakluyt, Voyages and Discoveries. So this would most assuredly fall into my seafaring craze. This looks super interesting. Next we have what will most assuredly, well, I shouldn't say most assuredly, we're only halfway through the year, but I think this is going to be my book of the year. I happened to find an older copy of it today. We have Endurance, Shackleton's Incredible Journey. If you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. I bought this copy as soon as I saw it. Of course, as you can see, I bought a lot more too, but the point is, this is a book that I would buy for people. And I'll probably buy for many people through the rest of my life. I'm sure I'll probably give away. It's an excellent, excellent read. If you're in any kind of difficult situation in your life, I feel like it could probably help you get through it. If you're in leadership roles, I feel like it could help you. If you're in following roles, if you're following a leader, I'm sure it could help you there too. It's unparalleled. The storytelling is excellent. For a bio piece, it feels like fiction. I was telling people as I was reading it, I don't want to say any spoilers. I don't think this is a spoiler in any way. If you've seen movies and you've seen characters survive and you're kind of thinking to yourself, That's so fake. Like, no one could ever really survive that. This book is way more intense, and the survival keeps getting more and more extreme. The situations they're put in keep getting more and more extreme. I won't spoil what happens to the crew, but this is a stellar book. I couldn't recommend it more. I didn't mean to do a mini review here, but it's hard not to with this book. It's hard not to start talking when you see this book. Highly recommend. Excellent book. Super cool. All right, next we've got Civil War in Pictures. This seemed like an interesting book about the Civil War. It's got all these almost woodcut looking or etching looking pictures. Yeah, it just seemed like an interesting book. I don't really know what to expect from it. Probably read it at some point. Next we've got First on the Moon, a voyage with Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, Edwin E. Aldrin Jr., and an epilogue by Arthur C. Clarke. So yeah, this should be a really good read. I don't really know what it's all about. Like, is it written by the astronauts or someone else? I don't know, but it sounds really cool. Space travel is, of course, incredibly fascinating, and being the first on the moon was a big moment in history. I recently bought a book on cuneiform writing, and I'm very interested in some of the ancient script stuff, but I saw this and couldn't pass it up because it felt like it was in that line. This is Sacred Signs, Hieroglyphs in Ancient Egypt by Penelope Wilson. I don't know entirely what to expect from it, but it seems like a good book. It seems interesting. I like reading about sort of these ancient scripts. Seeing how people communicated in the past is very interesting. This is a very random book. We've got Homestead, The Glory and Tragedy of an American Steel Town. Seems like an interesting piece. All right, next we've got poetry. I only got one poem book, aside from those kids ones that I talked about earlier. It's You Get So Alone at Times That It Just Makes Sense by Charles Bukowski. I've never read any Bukowski. I really want to read Bukowski. I have a couple other Bukowski books that are on my to-read. But I bought this one because it was cheap. 50 cents is hard to pass. The only reason I have an interest in Bukowski to begin with is because he wrote a poem called Dostoevsky about my favorite author, Dostoevsky, and it's a really nice poem, and that's kind of what sparked my interest for him. So maybe I'll read that at some point if I like one of the other books. If not, it was 50 cents, so it's not the total end of the world. All right, next we're into kind of art books or artsy books. So we've got Game Design Essentials. I'm not necessarily interested in game design right now in my life. I have been at points in the past. I might be at points in the future. And I don't usually go for a book like this, but what I liked about this book was it's not a very technical book. It's more about the artistic side of game design, like layout of things and arrangements of things and designing textures, perspective. It's more of an artistic take on game design. So it's the design side of game design, not the programming side of game design. I think I'm at a stage in my programming abilities where I could probably handle some of the technical programming side, but I know I can't do this stuff. So I figured if I ever get back into game design, or if I'm ever interested in it again, this might be a good first place to go to kind of get a little more rounded. I'm apparently starting to collect comic strip books, I guess. So today I got Zits, Don't Roll Your Eyes at Me, Young Man. Yeah, I mean, it kind of speaks for itself. It's Zits, it's classic, it's good stuff, Next we've got The Naked Cartoonist. Never heard of this book. It was maybe a bit of a risk, but I do like occasionally drawing. In the past, I had aspirations of becoming a comic strip artist, so this might potentially help me in that endeavor if I should rediscover it. You're probably noticing a lot of dead hobbies through this video. That's very insightful of you. All right, next we've got some super esoteric books. Well, maybe not esoteric, I shouldn't say that. The next book, though, is esoteric, but this whole category we're going to look at is programming and engineering books. So I like collecting old books which seemed really interesting in the time, but are kind of dead now. There's kind of an art to collecting these books where you could just totally fill your shelves with useless garbage of dead technology. So it's got to be kind of interesting, I'd say, to buy it. There's got to be some interesting factor to it. Well, I thought this probably fit that category. This is an English to Chinese computer dictionary. So you scroll through this thing and you've got things like, oh, here's information path in English. And then here it is in Chinese. It's so random, and it's all it's all computer jargon. I don't speak Chinese. I don't intend to learn Chinese, but I just thought this was probably one of the most interesting books I've stumbled across. I wonder when it's even published. Like, how out of date is this by now? Because even this lingo is changing so much. 1984. Yeah. This is probably very out of date. And I might not even be reading the publisher date there. I just see a 1984. The rest is in Chinese, so I wouldn't know. Very interesting. This is Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace. This is another Risk book. I have no idea what I'm getting into here. I am starting to get a little interested in kind of the law side of things. But this could be totally in the exact intersection that I want it to be in, or it could be off in the woods somewhere else. Next, we've got Understanding Solid State Electronics, a Radio Shack book from back in the day. I don't know if y'all remember Radio Shack. It just seems like a good introductory text to these things. I did a couple things like this in college, and I'd like to play with it again at some point, I'm sure. So next we've got a good old engineering notebook. So what is an engineering notebook? An engineering notebook is a collection of drawings, basically. So you have grids where you can do your drawings. You have the signature of who did it, the date it was done, and kind of approval and stuff like that. But it's basically just a big old book of grid paper, graph paper. This is interesting. Someone I know might like it, but if not, I'll hang on to it. It could be a useful tool someday. And then last but not least in this category, we've got 2 C programming books. We've got Applications Programming in C. We've got Absolute Beginner's Guide to C. This might be a little remedial for me, I'm not really sure. But yeah, I like C. There's kind of this allure of programming at such a low level in a language that not a lot of people can do nowadays, but it's still very powerful, albeit a little unsafe to use. So yeah, I'm kind of interested in those. Not sure if I'll read them. I already have a copy of Learn C the Hard Way, which I've been failing to work through, and that's kind of the one I would go through first. So, all right, there you have it. There were all 100 books. I hope you enjoyed this, the 2 of you who made it this far. I'm going to go have a throat lozenge. That was a lot of talking.